Today, on Brasher Warning.
Now imagine you're on the ground that day. You see this plane going into a cloud, and the engine sounds, not right. Then you hear this loud pop, not like thunder, something different. And then pieces of the plane start falling out of the cloud. Can you imagine seeing that?
It's chilling, really.
Welcome to Brasher Warning, the podcast that dives deep into aviation incidents with sharp analysis, insightful discussions, and just a touch of edge. If you're passionate about aviation and love a good post-incident breakdown, you're in the right place. Before we take off, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your crew. Let's get into it.
Today, we're looking into something pretty heartbreaking, really. It's a stark reminder about how powerful nature can be, how unforgiving. We're going to be dissecting the in-flight breakup of a Piper PA-32R300. It happened back on July 8th, 2012, near New Site, Mississippi. 3 lives were lost that day. And our mission today is to figure out why, not just what happened, but why it happened. We'll be going through the National Transportation Safety Board's findings for this one. And this isn't just an aviation story. It's really about decision-making under pressure.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the limits of technology and, well, just respecting those forces that are bigger than all of us.
What's really interesting about this accident, it's not just one big catastrophic failure. It was a whole chain of events, like a cascade of decisions that kind of all snowballed. And it really exposes these systemic issues that can put even experienced pilots in danger.
So let's set the scene a little bit. We've got our flight. It starts at Western Carolina Regional. That's in North Carolina. And it was headed for University Oxford Airport in Mississippi. Now, this pilot, he wasn't new to this. He had his private pilot certificate, single engine and instrument ratings, logged over 450 hours of flight time, almost 100 of those in this exact type of aircraft. So on paper, it sounds like he knew what he was doing.
But here's the thing. His last flight review, it was over a year before this accident. And that raises a big question about, staying sharp. How do pilots keep their skills up?
Yeah, it's like anything else. You don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're on the ground that day. You see this plane going into a cloud, and the engine sounds, not right. Then you hear this loud pop, not like thunder, something different. And then pieces of the plane start falling out of the cloud. Can you imagine seeing that?
It's chilling, really. The eyewitness accounts, they match up perfectly with what the NTSB found. This wasn't a typical crash. It was like the plane got ripped apart in the air. And to understand how that could even happen, we need to look at the weather that day.
And it was wild. Thunderstorms all around the crash site, wind gusts. But here's the thing. There was a convective signet issued.
Right.
Basically saying, danger zone.
This wasn't some hidden threat. The information was out there. The question is, what did the pilot do with that information?
Okay, so he had this XMWX satellite weather system in the cockpit. You'd think that'd be enough to avoid trouble.
Well, here's where it gets complicated. This wasn't like those weather apps on our phones, always updating. It gave him data, but it was delayed, like refreshing every 5 minutes.
So like he's flying with outdated information.
Exactly, like using a map from 1999 to navigate a city that's totally different now.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
The FAA's been very clear about the limitations of these delayed systems. They're good for planning, getting the big picture. But when you're up there near a thunderstorm, it can't be your only source of information. You need something real time.
And sadly, it seems like that's exactly what happened here.
When the NTSB looked at the wreckage, they found tensile overload fractures on the left wing and the vertical stabilizer.
I gotta admit, that sounds a little like engineer talk. What did that really mean for the plane itself?
Well, imagine you have one of those plastic model airplanes and you twist it with all your strength. Eventually, snap, the wings break off, right? Those fractures tell us that's basically what happened to this plane. The forces in that storm, they were so strong that they ripped the plane apart. It exceeded its limits.
That's a terrifying thought. So we have a pilot, maybe relying on old info, flies into this monster storm, and the plane itself, it just couldn't handle it.
And we can't forget about the human element here either. While all this is happening, the pilot's trying to keep control of the plane. He's battling updrafts. It's sensory overload. Even the best pilot can make mistakes in those conditions.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that there are so many layers to aviation safety.
And that brings us back to that question, how can we learn from this and make sure that pilots have every possible safeguard?
So let's look closer at the technology side of this. What are the limitations of these satellite weather systems? Why shouldn't pilots rely on them completely?
Well, it really comes down to that delay. See, with satellite systems, the data, It's got to travel from the satellite down to a ground station.
Right.
Then it gets processed, then beamed back up to the plane. It's like a relay race. And those seconds, they matter, especially with weather that's changing so fast.
So even if you're looking at your screen and it shows clear skies ahead,
Mm-hmm.
by the time you actually get there, it could be a totally different story.
Exactly. Now, I'm not saying these systems are useless, but for actually making decisions during the flight, especially around thunderstorms, they just can't be your only tool. You need real-time information for that.
So what is the gold standard then? What should pilots be using? I mean, it's like you wouldn't do surgery without the patient's medical history, right?
That's a great analogy. For instrument flights, especially, that medical history is a good weather briefing.
Yeah.
And the scalpel, well, that's onboard weather radar. It gives you these instant snapshots of precipitation, storm cells. You can actually see what's right in front of you and make those split-second decisions.
So if the pilot in this case had had that onboard radar, he might have seen the thunderstorm forming and changed course, before he got caught.
It's definitely possible. Obviously, we can't go back in time, but having that real-time information, it makes all the difference.
For sure.
It's like having a flashlight in a dark room versus just stumbling around.
I keep thinking about the fact that he filed 3 instrument flight plans that day, but never requested a weather briefing. Not even one. It just seems crazy to skip that.
Yeah, it's baffling, especially when you're flying IFR under instrument flight rules, meaning you're relying on those instruments to navigate not just what you can see. Those briefings aren't just a suggestion, they're vital. It's like a roadmap of what you're flying into, forecasts, hazards, everything.
It's like checking the road conditions before a long drive. You want to know if there's construction, accidents, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And this accident, it really highlights how important they are. Now, beyond briefings, the NTSB also stressed the importance of pilots understanding what the technology can and can't do, especially with weather information.
Right, we've talked about those delayed data systems, how they can be misleading. It's like trying to use a map that doesn't show all the changes.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding the tech itself. Pilots need training on how to use it correctly, how to interpret the data and make good decisions with it.
Which brings us to another point. Pilot training. How do we make sure that these pilots are ready for these super stressful situations? I mean, weather's not static, it's constantly changing.
Pilots need to understand how these systems form,
Right.
how they move, how they can change so quickly, and what that means for flying conditions. It's like teaching a sailor about wind, but also about currents and tides, the whole system.
Yeah, so knowing when to change course or delay a flight, even make a landing if things get really bad, those are huge decisions.
Right, and that's where simulations and scenario-based training come in. They need to practice making these tough calls in a safe environment to build that confidence, that instinct.
So it's bridging the gap between knowing something theoretically and actually being able to use it when things get real.
Yeah, like a firefighter who knows how to use a hose but needs to practice under pressure.
Exactly. And this training, it's not just for new pilots, right? It's for everyone throughout their career.
Oh, absolutely. Aviation's always changing. New technology, new regulations, new challenges. Pilots need to stay sharp.
Okay, so we have these recommendations from the NTSB, but how do we make sure they're actually put into practice? A report's one thing, but actually changing behavior is a whole other beast.
It really takes everyone working together. The FAA, for example, they set the standards. Think of them as the referee, making sure everyone plays by the rules. Encourage the use of things like real-time weather radar. Make certain training mandatory.
And then you have flight schools, training organizations. They need to be on board too, right? Putting weather education at the front, teaching those best practices.
Exactly. And let's not forget the pilots themselves. They have to take ownership of their own training, that desire to improve, to be the safest pilot they can be.
Everyone involved in aviation working together.
Because ultimately, as this accident shows us, aviation safety isn't just checking boxes and procedures, it's a mindset. It's about learning, thinking critically, and having respect for what Mother Nature can throw at you.
But let's shift gears a bit. We've been focused on the technical side, but we can't forget the human cost here. 3 lives were lost, families, loved ones.
It's a stark reminder that behind every report, every statistic, there are real people whose lives are changed forever. And that's why we do what we do. It's to prevent these things from happening again.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's widen the lens a bit. What are the takeaways here for everyone, even if they never step foot in a cockpit?
At its core, this is about making decisions under pressure. The pilot was in a challenging situation, and the choices he made, well, they had tragic consequences.
But isn't that something we all face? Career choices, finances, relationships, we're always making decisions that have consequences.
Absolutely. And like that pilot, we don't always have all the time or all the information we'd like. So what can we learn from this to make better decisions? What can we take away and apply to our everyday choices? Well, one big lesson is the importance of planning, being prepared. Just like that pilot should have planned his flight carefully, we should approach any big decision the same way. Gathering information, thinking through the options, even having a backup plan, those are important steps.
It's like they say, failing to plan is planning to fail. But planning is only as good as the information you have. And we've seen how just blindly trusting technology can backfire.
This accident was like a wake-up call. Relying on old data like our pilot did with that satellite system, it's like playing with fire.
Yeah, and even with the best information, we have to be aware of our own biases, our blind spots. Overconfidence, it can be dangerous. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a question to think about. In a world that relies so much on technology, how do we stay in control? How do we use these powerful tools wisely? And how do we remember the human element, especially when lives are on the line? Thanks for joining us. We hope it's given you some things to think about, maybe inspired you to make smart decisions no matter what you're facing. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay safe.
Thanks for tuning in to Brasher Warning. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a flight with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment or review, and don't forget to share the podcast with your fellow aviation enthusiasts. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and keep soaring.
American 1552, contact center 127.0.
1552, we're going to be Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We have an engine failure. We're going to return to DFW.
1552, roger. And which runway do you need?
We'll take 18 right.
Roger, American 1552, turn right heading 020, just going to maintain 8,000.